Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. It looks like we've just gone live on our panel video via Melon. So, welcome everybody. We're just preparing for the event logistics and giving people a chance to get here. And I think part of that is we've got some announcements from the event team to start us off.
Hi everyone, welcome to the WWDC Community Week venue. We have the freelancer get together event going to start in just a minute or two. So we want you all here at the patio to watch the stream. You can access the video player from the bottom left corner, where you can once you click on it, the video player will pop up and you can hit play. And if you have any questions, you can scan the QR code on the live stream. It will take you to a website where you can directly post questions, and the questions will be run by the speakers at the end of the talk. And if you need any kind of assistance or if there's any query, you can reach out to us. So you can just type help in the chat box, or my name is Sinchan. So you can just locate me too, and we'll be there for help. So if there's anything, we're right here, and wish you guys a good time. Let's get the event started now. And yes, Duncan and all speakers. So we'll go live on Melon in just a few seconds. So make sure you're there.
Duncan, if you can hear me, I don't think anybody can hear you talking, actually. You seem to be unmuted, but audio is not coming through.
Let's try that again. I'm imagining that people are hearing me much better now.
For sure, yeah.
How frustrating that is. I said the most insightful things I've said in my entire life, but unfortunately, my memory is much worse than my insight. So none of us will ever know what happened. I can tell you, however, that you should never have a hardware mute button on your microphone in addition to all the many other ways that you could be muted between here and the stream. So my apologies to everyone. Well, that gave us a chance for people to join us. And let me tell you again some of the things I was saying. Welcome to this stream. Apologies for the technical difficulties that I have put on our events team. One of the things I was talking about was, what should you do if you can't hear us properly? And that is quite ironic. I speak from a position of weakness on that in this case, but one of the things that we've noticed during the events in the week is that if you're in GatherTown, but you have the video of the stream just down in a small thumbnail in the corner, then the audio from the thumbnail is muted so that you can hear the environment around you more. So if you're having trouble hearing us, make sure you've got the stream on full screen mode, and you can do that by pressing the X key on your keyboard in GatherTown. That will only work if you're not standing right next to one of the interactive exhibits in GatherTown. So you need to not be right next to a whiteboard or a notice board or something like that at the time. So that may help. The other thing is, if you could please mute your microphone when you're in GatherTown, when you're not trying to talk to the people near you. Otherwise, your background audio will actually be competing with their ability to hear what's coming across the stream. Now, on the other hand, if one of your nearby neighbors hasn't done this, if you hover over to their video, you can actually mute other attendees just for yourself as a way of solving this problem. So there's some logistics. Right. Well, hopefully we've had some people join us during that period. It was all planned, having that delay with my microphone muted, of course. Let me introduce myself properly. My name's Duncan Babbage. I am a person that is recovering from many things. In chronological order, I'm a recovering perfectionist, a recovering clinical psychologist, and a recovering academic. And currently, I'm still an active freelancer. But I guess some of the discussions in the panel today about the pros and cons of freelancing may answer the question of one day I'll also describe myself as a recovering freelancer. Now, most of my work is actually freelancing in the health technology strategy sector around applying technology in healthcare, particularly around mental health. But I also do some freelancing in app development and am an indie iOS app developer. But really, my job here today is to facilitate a discussion between these other people who are freelancers. Ruslan, we can see your video in this channel here. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
That's all fine. So I'm going to invite each of our panel members, first of all, to introduce themselves just briefly in a minute or two, talk a little bit about their background, and then I'm going to put some questions to the panel. We also want questions from you, however, and so you can submit those via Padlet. A link will have been placed in GatherTown for you that you can access, or you can scan the QR code on the stream to also access that. And so we'll be looking at that during the next 45 minutes or a little bit more. After that, we're going to come into GatherTown with you, and there'll be the opportunity to verbally talk directly backwards and forwards, initially with the group and then with individuals as well. So let's see. I'm going to invite our panel members to start with their introductions then. And we're going to go with the order they're just listed on the events page. So we're starting with James White in Australia.
Unmute. Yes. Hello, everyone. Yeah, James White is my name. And as Duncan said, I'm in Australia. I'm actually in Perth on the other side of Australia. So I've been freelancing in various ways for, well, a long time now. I'm struggling to remember when I had a real job. For a long time, I was a freelance designer, doing not digital stuff at all, branding and physical paper stuff. And I can remember at one point, somewhere in 2010, I thought, I wonder how hard it is to make an app. So I literally Googled, how do you make an app? And then, next thing I downloaded Xcode and off I went. And so it went well. And after a certain length of time, I started to feel confident to charge people to do that. So I started doing that, and that went well. And then I don't know, I had people who wanted to not just make iOS apps, but also like Android apps or other kinds of things. So I started to band together with other freelancers, and eventually there was even more. So I needed to sort of hire them on a more full-time basis. So eventually, I guess I have built something that looks a bit like an agency now, but I guess it still feels like a freelance thing. Like I'm still going through all those things that freelancers do, getting clients, negotiating contracts, It's just, I guess, it's not my name on the invoice, it's the company. So yeah, still a freelancer at heart, I suppose.
Excellent. Matthias Maulberger from Germany.
Can you all hear me? Nice. Okay. Hi, as Duncan already said, I'm Matthias, and I'm sitting here in Germany. I'm doing freelancing not quite as for such a long time as James. I started in 2018, so I'm almost I almost finished my third year. And I originally started programming back in university when I did a degree in electrical engineering. I had my first real encounter with programming in C for embedded applications, and then did a little bit more application development with Java and C# in various internships. After I finished my master's degree, I started out as a software developer here in Munich, also writing C# applications for the .NET platform. Yeah, and I did that for like, I don't know, 5 years or so. until I realized I needed a change, and I started to apply to different companies here in the area. Some of them wanted to hire me, but I didn't want to work for them. Then others that I would have worked for, they didn't want to hire me, couldn't convince them of my capabilities, or I don't have them, either way. But during the time I started already getting requests from former contacts if I can help them out with some development work, and then I just kind of slid into freelancing, and here I am.
Thanks, Matthias. Marlon Sundberg from Canada.
Yeah, hi. So yeah, my name is Malin. Not really from Canada. I'm originally from Sweden, but I also lived in Perth and close to James before that, and in Sydney as well. So James and I used to go to the same meetup back in Perth, which was awesome. But yeah, now I'm in Canada, in Vancouver, and I guess I'm doing both. I'm both an indie developer and a freelancer. So I'm working on an app called Orbit, which is actually for freelancers, for you to be able to track the time. But as part of that, I also do freelancing. And in general, I tend to focus on sort of the projects that I try to pick projects that are like exciting to me. It tend to be slightly longer projects. At the moment, I'm working on a longer project together with a startup in Denver. And I do a bit, I originally started out doing iOS development, but now I do a bit of everything. I do design and also do backend development and websites sometimes when I have to. And yeah, just, I guess, like being an indie developer as well, I sort of tend to do all those different pieces. So that's what I do as part of freelancing as well.
Okay, thank you. Mark Kevin King in the Philippines.
All right, so my name is Mark. I'm here in the Philippines. I've been doing freelance work since 2016. So I started as an iOS developer from 2014. By the time I reached 3 years, at least 3 years experience, that's the time I decided to become a full-time freelance. So my skills are focused more on the iOS development, but I tend to diversify myself because, when doing freelance, most companies will prefer at least you have knowledge on other aspects rather than having a focus. Part of it is, yeah, so currently I provide services for fintech, not just on iOS development, but also part of the solutions team in general. Yep, that's all from me.
Great. Vatsal, I've never asked you how to pronounce your surname. I would have said Vatsal Mano, but that may be not the correct pronunciation. I know you're based in India. Tell us more.
Yeah, hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
My name is Vatsal Manot. I am a developer from Bangalore in India. I'm originally from Kolkata, from West Bengal. I've been programming for about a decade now. I started in 2011 when jailbreaking was in full swing. So I started with developing jailbroken tweaks in Objective-C++. And I've been programming in Swift ever since it came out. I mostly focus on SwiftUI and basically just all the latest Apple technologies. I guess I've been freelancing for the past 2 years. I started professionally working in the industry after high school in 2017, and I worked for a bunch of startups, but that experience didn't quite pan out. So I just decided freelance would be a good idea. For context, I'm 21 right now. I maintain an open source library called SwiftUIX. I think some of you might have heard of it. It's just a framework that helps building SwiftUI apps. And I also do a bit of Node.js and backend development on the side. But yeah, I've been freelancing for the past 3 years. That's about it.
And our final panel member, the most recently launched freelancer, Danny Vals in the Netherlands. Donnie, who has got up along with Matthias at 6 a.m. local time. In fact, before that, the panel started at 6 a.m. So kudos to both of you.
Yeah, thanks Duncan for that introduction. So I am a little bit of the odd one out because I have not fully kicked off my freelancing career yet. although I am in full swing of setting it up, and I will officially be off on my own in about 2 weeks, on July 1st. I will no longer have a job and instead rely on freelancing to make a lot of my income happen. Um, I've been developing for a very long time now. I would say about 13 years, maybe. Always worked for other people. A few years ago, I started writing regularly on my website, on my blog. I've published a bunch of books and done speaking a lot, and that all went so well that eventually I figured I could probably do this almost full time, with freelancing on the side. So after a very, very long time of thinking this is way too scary to pull off, I still think it's way too scary to do, but I decided it's not going to get any less scary by waiting. So why wait? Time to kick this new adventure off. So thanks for having me on, Duncan, as the super newbie on this panel. I think I will learn more from the panel members than I will be able to provide insights to others, but it's going to be fun.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And it seemed like the perfect bridge between people that have been freelancing for a while and people who are attending who might be wondering, should I launch into this way of working, to have someone who's just made that call and very publicly. What a great timing for it. Well, I'm going to kick off the panel questions with a fairly broad one for anyone to take on, and that's to ask you, what do you think as a freelancer? Is it better to be a generalist or a specialist? Who wants to take first punt at that? James is waving his hands. Go ahead.
So I don't know exactly what you meant by specializing and generalizing, but in my mind, there's two ways that can be. You can be a specialist or a generalist in terms of the technology that you do, but also in terms of the skills or the different things that you bring to the table. So in my case, like I said, I've been designing for a long time, and then at a certain point, I took on development. And I guess for me, sometimes I look at people who are really good at one thing and I feel jealous. And I feel like, man, I wish I had, particularly for me, it's with design. I look at people who are great designers. I don't know, just to pull a name, Mark Edwards, some of you will be familiar with. I look at the stuff he puts on Twitter and various places and I think, man, I wish I had really focused a lot more on design. But then I just really like the fact that some days I'm doing design work, sometimes I'm doing development work. I feel like my clients value that I come from both sides, and I can kind of marry those two things together. And I think I've made my peace with the fact that I'm never going to be great at any one thing, but I'm good enough at a bunch of things, and it keeps my life interesting. So I don't know if it's the optimal, if we're talking about like optimizing income or opportunities or those kinds of things, but I'm really happy in my case to be doing lots of interesting different things. And I suppose in my case, the one area that I have focused more in or specialized more in is not so much the things I do, but the subject matter. So my company really specializes in public health apps. So there is a level of focus that enables me to I guess, have that niche that helps me to get work or to get opportunities by specializing not so much in the things I do, but the kinds of subjects that I specialize in.
That is a great illustration of something that often comes up, I think, for many of us, because James, I look at you and think, I wish I had James's design skills. So there you go. Marlon, I see you have your ready to go there.
Yeah, well, I think I definitely agree with, like, James mentioned that, like, I don't really know how you should measure, like, what the best way is, but I think in general, if you are excited about multiple aspects, and I think it's the same for me, I love to be involved in the entire product, and for me, that's sort of like, it's something that I'm most passionate about, and like, even when I worked as a developer, like only on the developer side, I always sort of got involved in the design part anyways, and I was always in those meetings, and being part of the whole product is just something that I tend to not stay away from. So I think it's a lot about like where you're driven to go. I don't know necessarily which part is like, as James said, like what's gonna make you like the most money or in that way. But I do think in general, if you do what you're passionate about and what you care about, and if you're good at all those things, then I think there's no reason why you should limit yourself. And I think that can be like a strength, like that you do care about those different areas, or that you do have like experience with different languages, whatever it is, as long as you're passionate about it, then it can be like a specialty for you. If you just feel like it's something you do because like you drag yourself into it, but you don't actually think it's fun, then I don't think it will be as beneficial for yourself either to do that.
That's all.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is the things that you don't know and the things that you don't know that you don't know. And being a generalist allows you to bridge the gap between things that you don't know and the macro view and like the larger scale of things. So I feel like you're not mutually exclusive. You can be a generalist and at the same time specialize deeply in something. And I think that's probably the sweet spot as you mature as a freelancer, because it allows you to have this like larger macro view of all the possible fields that you could be working in, all the things that you could be doing. But then knowing that, okay, I'm choosing to specialize in this one thing that I really love and like doing, or is making me a lot of money. And yeah, that's about it.
Matthias, I
Okay.
see you there.
Sorry, Mark. Okay, I'm on. Yeah, I just have to agree with my former speakers here, because I think too that, or at least for me, being more on the generalist side works out better, because when I when I have projects with clients where I'm working on the app side, and I'm responsible for, let's say, developing the Bluetooth interface with which we communicate between smartphone and a medical device, and something comes up on the device side, I can always like offer to jump in and help out on the embedded side too. And that's really something that helped me a lot in the past. And also it keeps, I think being a generalist keeps things interesting. I mean, otherwise my biggest fear would be to, I don't know, always work on the same kinds of apps, like parsing JSON sent to you from a server and coming up with new kinds of animations or stuff like that, or now you're writing in Swift UI and not UIKit or whatever. But that's not the diversity I'm looking for. Like, I'm looking for the diversity in the environment, and not like the programming language or that kind of stuff.
All right.
Mark, go
ahead,
For
Mark.
me, okay, how does it differ from a generalist and a specialist? So when I look at it, I think of it as a strategy of a freelancer. So if you want to be more focused on some special skills, like for me, I'm not a super pro iOS developer, but I do understand much of that all technical context, like the back end development, Android stuff, also the front end web. I did try. So because when I want to be a generalist, my strategy is to get to work with a lot of people, and at the same time gather those connection opportunities that I might be using in the future. So, but if I want to be a specialist, my focus is more on the aspect development itself. Those kind of market tends to be much more expensive because on the job market, if we say supply and demand, a specialist tends to have much more higher salary rather than a generalist. But for a generalist, I do believe yeah, you get to get open more connection at the same time, get more opportunities or close more projects out there. That's how I see the differences. So currently, I'm practicing as a generalist, but yeah, my main development is always at iOS. But at the same time, I can provide synchronized solutions across multi-platforms.
It's interesting, isn't it? When I was bringing together this panel, one of the things I actually worked pretty hard to try and do was to have a gender balance on the panel. And I just really struggled. I was surprised at how difficult it was to find people who identified themselves as doing freelancing and contracting work, and even more difficult to find women who are in that space. And it kind of raised for me an interesting question more generally about whether freelancing can actually even be a stable, ongoing state, or whether the reason why there seems to be such a small percentage of people who say this is what they're doing is because actually inevitably it tends to collapse or convert into one of the three adjacent options, either a full-time role in a company or working as an indie dev, which is really very different to being a freelancer, although many people do both, I guess, or setting up an agency. And then I started to wonder, well, maybe actually setting up an agency is really just freelancing still gone large. So, I'm interested in panel's thoughts on those issues. Is freelancing a stable state, or does it tend to collapse into one of the strange attractors that has more kind of gravity, if you want to think about it in terms of complexity theory? Donnie.
So I would just like to sort of tack on what you got at in the beginning, where you said like, there's not a lot of people to do this. Like, why would that be? Because obviously I have not done this for a very long time. I've actually been thinking about going into freelancing and actually saying like, hey, I do freelance work for about 6 months before I actually was ready to take the step. And then it took another like 2 months before I was ready to like tell everybody that I'm doing it. So the one thing I was scared of is like, will there always be work? For example, it feels like this is going to be a very shaky thing where you're constantly looking for clients and you're always wondering when that next paycheck will be paid out. But as I was sort of looking into it and thinking about it, there's more than enough development work to go around. And even though it might seem like it could be unstable, it also seems like because there's plenty of work, it's not like you're going to be out of a job for 6 months or whatever, right? Like it's not like this is all going to stop. And most of us, I believe, would be able to find a job easily to fall back on if we wanted to. So that sort of, to me, makes it seem like freelancing, even though it might not be for super, super long term, that I don't know. If you're thinking about getting into it and you're worrying about the long term, it does feel to me at this point like that's not really an issue because it's so easy to find a job once you have done freelancing for a while. Like there's plenty of things you could be doing. And for me, the one thing that I did like to make sure that I had was income of my own, doing something indie or something different, so you don't have to rely on clients all the time. So it's not really your question entirely, but I just wanted to tack on to that first part where you said there's not a lot of people doing it. Because I was one of these people until like, well, I still am technically for 2 more weeks. So.
Who else wants to tackle that one? That's all.
Yeah, so I do have a finite sight for the end of my freelancing, and I think I want to eventually scale up to something like an agency or my own company. But the way I think about it is that freelancing, while I agree with Tony, it's there's a dearth of work out there, and you can never not be. I mean, you can never be in a place where you don't have work opportunities. It is difficult because there is sometimes uncertainty, especially during the pandemic right now. There's been a lot of uncertainty with clients, with their projects, with apps shutting down, companies shutting down. But it's great because as someone with mild ADHD, like I like to keep moving and keep working on different projects all the time. And freelancing is non-committal, but still a way where you can commit to like short-term projects and work on them at the stretch. And then decide also whether you want to keep doing it or whether it's not the best fit. So it gives me the flexibility that I want right now in this stage of my career. And I think that's fantastic for to have that choice and like to be in the place where you have that flexibility. So yeah, I'm not sure whether that there might be people who want to do it even for a decade or or longer. But I think most people that I know, they end up scaling it up either into their own company by, like either finding the idea that they wanted to work on all along, or basically they end up scaling it up to an agency where they work with people they love and know. And yeah, I think it's the flexibility that appeals to most people. So while you need that, freelancing makes sense.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it already. What's all that? Like, I think the benefit of freelancing is that I think many people who are attracted to doing freelancing is that they do get that flexibility, and if that flexibility happens to lead you into a indie app or like your own product or even building your own team, and that is the direction you're pulled in, as long as you still feel like you have that flexibility, which I do think you have in many of those adjacent areas. Like, you have the flexibility to work on your own app, and if that's going well, you can continue. You also have the flexibility to continue longer on projects as well sometimes. And I think it's much about that and you being able to decide. So I don't think it necessarily needs to be a state necessarily where you continue doing freelancing all the time, but I think it's more about having the ability to just sort of combine those things and sort of go the direction that pulls you and that you're excited about. I think that sort of, I don't know. I think as long as like people find the things that they're excited about, I think that's sort of going to lead that direction.
How about we go to Mark and then Matthias? I see you're both interested to talk to this one.
You want to go first, Mark? Okay, I'll go. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that freelancing isn't like a stable like thing, because I think you can really make a stable income with doing freelance work, because most of the times when you have a client and let's say you develop an application for them, then after the initial phase or the first phase is finished, usually they don't stop supporting the app, or they want to develop new features. So they will come eventually back to you. Doesn't mean that you have to leave the code base so that the client is super dependent on you. But but yeah, if you I have a lot of recurring clients because they know me, they trust me, and sometimes you just have clients that like to work together with you, and you can get stability from that relationship. And I don't know, and James can correct me later, but I don't know if like setting up an agency is necessarily more stable, because you're still like pitching to clients. Now you're also responsible for your employees. Yeah, maybe the only option of those three, the stablest option, is like work for a company and just have your paycheck every month. But other than that, I think for me the only thing I'm thinking about is, does it get old? Like always switching between organizations in Microsoft Teams and waiting for the client and to the Teams client to respond, and then dealing with like 4 different installations of Jira for each individual client, and so like the administrative stuff can like wear you out sometimes.
James, you must have some perspectives on this in terms of the question of freelance versus agency.
Yeah, and I think what you were getting at, Duncan, with the stability thing was not so much can freelancing provide a stable source of income, because of course it absolutely can, but rather can that sort of, I guess, pure freelancing scenario of I am a freelancer, I work on my own doing various projects, is that something that tends to be a stable thing over time? And I think there's something in that where you kind of either succeed so much at it that you invariably, it becomes bigger and you start banding together and subcontracting and all those things, or and I don't want to use the word failure because, deciding you don't want to freelance anymore or you want to take a break from freelancing and take a position, that's not failure, of course. That's just doing something different. But yeah, either, there's so much work that it goes that way, or for various reasons it goes the other way. And I think I'm trying to think of people who have freelanced for a long time. I mean, I can't think of anyone who's freelanced longer than mine. I suppose I've been freelancing in some capacity for probably 20 years, but I did have a job in the middle of that. So, I've been freelancing for 10 years, and that seems like a very long time. But no, I think you're onto something there, where there's something inherent about it that you just tend to migrate in one direction or the other. My observation, anyway.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because indie work, and I think, freelancing to some extent too. Obviously, with freelancing, you might be brought in to do a really deep, technical, very sharply defined piece of work in a large application, but you may also be doing, build a whole app for a client, where you're looking right across the entire tech stack and designing the architecture, writing all the code, doing the implementation, putting it in the app store and everything. And then on top of all of that, you running a business as well. And I couldn't be struck with how different that is to my lab this morning, where I was talking to an Apple engineer who appeared on the WWDC video I was asking questions about himself. And I asked, this thing you said at the end of the video, is that implementable by an individual indie developer? And he said, well, here are some considerations and here are some thoughts. And then he said, we use this in 2 places at Apple, and on just one of those 2 applications, we have a team of 24 full-time quality assurance engineers who've been working on this continuously for 10 years. And Apple and Google are the only people that have ever solved it. And I thought that was fascinating, particularly because the thing was listed in a WWDC video as, you could kind of do some aspects of this. And it really struck me how different it is than taking on the whole tech stack versus working in a big company, right? But on top of that is the business stuff, and that's what makes freelancing so different to indie. And in the Padlet, we've got quite a few questions that I think are elements of this. And so I'm going to put them as a group to you as a panel, which is that people want to know, how do you wrangle the money stuff? So what kind of billing model do people use? Is it hourly or weekly? Is it fixed rate or value-based? Another person asks, what's your process of providing estimates to clients? Do you add percentage contingencies? And if you do, how much? Or what are your strategies around setting and possibly increasing your rates? And I would hazard a guess that maybe this also is the answer to another person's question who put in Padlet, what's the thing you don't like about freelancing the most? But I might be wrong. Tell us what you do about pricing and billing. James.
Yeah, I'll happily talk about pricing. So in the early days, I did a lot of fixed price work. Do your best to estimate, come up with a figure, keep your fingers crossed, hope for the best. And I mean, I was in a good position because I think when you are both designing and developing the app, you have flexibility to make it work. If there's a comfortable budget and things are going well, you can maybe, you can add some nice design finesses to it. If things are a bit tight, you can maybe drop some of your, really crazy ideas. So it kind of worked. But I have really migrated over time away from fixed price. I really don't do a lot anymore. So like I said, I do a lot of health work. So a lot of the projects I work on are funded by grants, government grants, various kinds of funding like this. And so clients generally have a very fixed budget. They can't often find more money. So my preferred model now is, I guess it's still fixed price, but what's the big difference is it's not fixed scope, right? So there's not that process of, before anyone's paid any money, trying to understand exactly what you want to do with your app, to just be able to get a really, really detailed spec and then put a price on that. And then you're guaranteed to do everything in that spec and hope there's no misunderstandings. What I tend to encourage now is, let's find out what you want to spend. I will indicate to you, yes, I think that's achievable. I think something like the app you're describing is achievable in that budget. But then let's work together to find out what exactly that app's going to be. So it may not have every single feature that you've just told me you'd love to have, but I feel confident it will have most of them, or the most important things. And then as we go along this process together, we will talk and we'll negotiate. And if there are new things that come up midstream, or you take the app out to user acceptance testing and you discover some new thing you want to do, then we'll work it out. We'll work out what do you want. Shall we drop this feature? Shall we just limit that thing? Honestly, sometimes clients will sometimes find some more budget at that point. But the important thing is that we're working as a team, rather than what I used to find with real, genuine fixed price work. It was this kind of weird relationship where I'm the gatekeeper of the budget, where the client says, can we change this, and I'm constantly, well, that's not in scope. Sorry, it's not in scope. And I would have maybe expressed that there was some flexibility, because there has to be, right? Like if you do user acceptance testing and you want to move that button from the left to the right, or you want to change that text, that content, that's fine. We can accommodate minor changes, but then it's ambiguous. Where does that end? So this model of fixed, or maximum price, however you want to phrase it, but we'll work together on the spec. That's working really well for us as a company, or as freelancers now.
Václav, so you had your...
Yeah, I think it's impossible to do fixed price with most of the companies right now. I work with a lot of early stage startups and companies using SwiftUI and the latest technologies. So there are two points of volatility. A, that they're still building their product. So while they do analytics and while they learn more from the users, they might want to change major parts of their app. And you just can't account for that at the start of a working relationship. So what I love to do is have time-boxed trials and experiments with my clients. I tell them, hey, let's work on a milestone for the next 2 weeks or the month. Let's see if you're a good fit. And if we like working together, then let's keep working further. But I like scoping my work to weeks, or if I can, or months otherwise. And I bill hourly because, I just can't put... I reasonably can't give a concrete estimate for the number of hours it will take something to build, especially when you're working with bleeding edge tech like SwiftUI, where you could be hamstrung by an Apple bug for months on end, right? You can't account for that at the very start of the relationship. You have to let the client know explicitly that, hey, you're working with SwiftUI, something might break. If this happens, then you'll have to get paid off. We might have to compromise here. And I think that flexibility can't go along with like the rigidity of a fixed price project. So that's my take on it.
All right.
Mark, go
Okay.
ahead.
For me, getting a fixed scope project is not my forte. So what I tend to do is to charge my customer a monthly retainer deal instead. So at the same time, I can make it as a stable source of income on the long term. So I can get at least a maximum of 3. I can handle them at the same time. So at a fixed cost every month. That's way easier rather than scoping out the project for me, because one thing I learned when I did scoping the project is the most time-consuming part is scoping it, because it goes back and forth with the businesses and figuring out what needs to be delivered. And there are a lot of uncertainties also when it comes to scope out the project, because sooner or later you will have misunderstandings with the client. So that's one thing I'm trying to avoid, because it's gonna consume a lot of time. I have encountered clients that are headaches when it comes for a fixed scope of project. I tend to lose much more earnings because of that. Because when I'm doing freelancing, I measure it on a effective hourly basis. So if I can finish the project much faster, that means I'm able to achieve more revenue in terms of productivity. So I once charged a 2-hour meeting to fix their 1-month problem, and it's worth it. And there are cases where the scope should be at least 2 months, tend to extend 4 months. So that's a headache that happens on my experience. So if I advise to newly freelancers, yeah, I think getting a monthly retainer will work out quite well for you. But again, if you want to scale it up, it will be you should have at least someone or expert on managing those scopes rather than you yourself as a developer when you're not really expert on that part. So if there's a big project coming on my desk, I usually ask my partners, try scoping it out and let's see how much it will cost. But like I said, I won't be the one figuring out the scope. I will just provide the developers you need and the rates. So I can include as many freelancers as much as I can to get that big project. But when it comes to the business dealings, it's not my. It shouldn't be my problem because it's not my skill. So yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Go ahead, Marlon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think for me I tend to prefer to bill by hour because it's usually I take on quite bigger projects and it tend to be more as we might have a scope of things we want to have, but then we also have like additional things that would be nice, and then we might estimate sort of how long something will take. But since they tend to be longer projects, that can be quite hard to estimate. But we have like a sort of ballpark of how long a project is going to take, but then I do tend to prefer to rather bill by hour. And then also if we talk about like, oh, we think these are the features, then we might even like feel comfortable if we did that really like within a certain amount of time, we continue adding more things as well. So I think it depends a lot on the client as well, and like how much work that client has, and if there's ongoing things coming in or like additional features. I think that's always really exciting, and I think you sort of have to keep that in mind as well, whether or not it is sort of that set thing. And I think if you know that it's this one feature and you have a really good understanding of it, then maybe you can have like a base price for that project more. But I tend to prefer to do it a different way, to base it on the time.
You know, that's a good segue into me reminding or letting people know that the raffle that was announced in the tweet earlier today will actually mean that 5 attendees today will get a chance to get a 6-month subscription to Orbit, which is a time tracking and invoicing app for people who want to get paid, which sounds like an excellent segue there. I actually have I have a keynote presentation that shows information about this that has been sent to me during the call, because if there's nothing that's required as a freelancer, it's responding to things rapidly. However, unfortunately, I have discovered that you cannot share things to Google Chrome without rebooting Google Chrome, which I won't be doing in the middle of the live stream. So maybe we can figure out something else to do about that. But let me assure you that is happening. Time is always pressing on, so I'm going to fire across to a couple of other questions. Maybe just one or two people want to comment on this question from Padlet, which is cross-platform versus native development, this old chestnut. Is it wise to decide only to learn and build natively for iOS as opposed to learning cross-platform technologies, especially earlier on in your career? The person who asked this said they're a college junior in their case.
Okay, I think I can answer that since I have experience on both sides. So there's a huge difference when it comes to cross-platform and in native development. One is where the native gives you all the powers and tools needed to develop or customize your app, and another one is a cross-platform thing where you can build on multi-platform with just one source code base. Again, when doing it on a freelance, you have to understand it on two different aspects. One is the business side and the long-term goal of the project, and another one if it's a short-term basis or a very small scope of work. That's the time you'll go with cross-platform. But for fintech, highly recommended if you use native because when Apple releases new APIs, you can easily adapted them. Unlike and enhance the features. Unlike on cross-platform, you'll have to wait for the developer. Example, like for Flutter, you'll have to wait for the Flutter team to update their APIs and avail those new features. So again, it depends on the strategy, but for long term, it's native to go. But if the project will be very small, you can always go with cross-platform like Flutter. So again,
So,
it really depends. Yeah.
and I mean, there's always the general technology questions. Like for any organization, is a cross-platform technology decision going to be better or a native one? I guess maybe other panel members think about whether you've got any thoughts on, is there any difference for freelancers in how you should approach this? There's the technology questions, but is there a freelance specific kind of issue there as well?
So one thing that I have noticed whenever people ask me, like, hey, can you make an app for me? And I say, yes, I could do that even before I did freelancing. Whenever they want to have cross-platform, they typically have a very small budget and high demands. And those two things often don't work well together. So it's not necessarily a symptom of the technology, but it's more the client has a small budget. They want to get something good. They look at the web. They're like, oh, Flutter is great. I want to get somebody to build a Flutter thing for cheap because they do one app, they do one code base for two apps. It's going to be super fast, super cheap, super good. And in my experience, like I've always declined these, but I have one friend in an agency who has had me asked to make apps multiple times. They would sort of circle back to, but we want it to be cross-platform. And I always declined. And in the end, I always hear that the project went over budget like 4 times. My friend worked overtime because some freelancer said he could do it in like 10 hours for 2 apps. Of course, that was completely impossible. Technology wasn't sufficient. So, as a freelancer, to me, that sounds like bullet dodged. Apparently, the demands, budget, and technology were not aligned at all. Um, However, at the same time, if you want to learn both technologies, I would say go for it, be a specialist in one, and also do the generalist thing for the other ones. I don't think there's any harm in being versatile.
There's always more we could say on that, but I'm going to move us on to another question just because time is always limited. And I think there's a couple of interesting things that I'd like to pick up here. A couple of people have asked in Padlet about freelancers developing their skill set. How much do you learn your skills, like the upcoming async await, on your freelance assignments versus on your own unpaid time? What are your strategies for upskilling? Another person asks, at this point in your careers, how do you go about learning your skills and technologies, or do you simply rely on your existing skill set and work on refining that? Thoughts?
Monetize your learning. That's what I do. Write about it, talk about it, and monetize the learning. That's the short answer, for me at least.
Go ahead, Vetzel.
I think there's an interesting time split for me. I keep aside a very fixed set amount of time every week to do unstructured learning. I think I end up learning most of my major skills, or at least the fundamentals of it, on my own time. I don't like to charge clients for like pure learning, but at the same time, you can't like divorce learning from development. So when you're working on an app and you have to like go really deep into something like, for example, a collection view layout, designing your own custom collection view layout, you inevitably end up researching and learning a lot while you're on the job. And I think it's fair to keep that as part of the assignment. So I think it's a bit of both, but I would recommend that that keep aside a set amount of time where you can just do unstructured and creative learning, where you aren't burdened or pressured by time or money there. So yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree with Batzel and with Donnie, because obviously you can't always only rely on your past experience. You always need to learn and improve yourself and getting to know newer technologies and stuff like that. But you don't necessarily have to like jump on the newest technology like right away. I didn't have time to watch any WWDC session so far from this year. I only watched the State of the Union. I don't know what's new. Only from a few tweets maybe that I liked. But and you cannot like separate the learning from the client work. Obviously, if you do client work, you will learn, and and so you will have more experience, but also the client paid you in the meantime, and I think that's fair. But what you wouldn't do is like book a I don't know 6-hour video course on Swift UI or async await and put that on the client's clock. Like you need to
So
actively
Matthias,
work
does that
on
mean
there.
did that mean that you missed the session on the migration to C++ as the primary focus for all iOS and Mac developers deprecating Swift then?
Oh my god,
No,
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Have we all decided which clients we're billing this session to? That's important. For me, I
And
think. Go on.
sorry, James, if I may, thank you for your advice on that question to ask clients, what do you want to spend? That's a great one. Yeah. Stay
If
away
you can
from
get that
fixed prices.
information, it's you can't always get it. I think it's really important that the decisions we make around technology stack and doing new things, learning new things, is in service of the client and in service of the app, and not in service of what we personally want to do. So obviously, as everyone said, you're always going to learn new stuff. No app's ever been built before. Every app is a new app. There's going to be something new to learn. But I, for instance, wouldn't decide to adopt a new technology. I haven't really got into Swift UI yet, and I wouldn't decide to do a client app in Swift UI because it's the future and I want to learn it. I wouldn't learn that on the job on a project. I think it's really important, and this almost goes back to the last question as well, that when we choose a stack, that we communicate the choice with the client. This is really important if your client is not technical, like a lot of my clients are. They aren't, you're not working for like a development company. You're working with people who want to make an app. That you communicate with them the decisions that you're making that will have long-term implications for their app and for them. That may outlive you. And so what are the pros and cons? If you are like, I'm a huge advocate for native development, but I will make sure I'm clear about the pros and the cons of doing that. So they know the decisions or APIs that I'm choosing, like third-party APIs that might go away in the future or might cost more. So every single thing is communicated, because I don't want to be the guy that, some years down the track, they realize they're backed into a corner because of a choice I made that they weren't even aware of.
Heavy sense of responsibility there.
It is.
I want to give us an opportunity within the allotted 90 minutes to get to the GatherTown environment where we can chat more informally with people. And so I'm just going to put one final question to you here, panel, and then a few concluding comments, and we'll migrate over there. And so briefly to conclude, what would be your one best piece of advice about freelancing that you'd like to hand on to other people? I should probably say who to start. Let's go in reverse order from how we started. So, Donnie, why don't you start first?
If you think about starting and think it's scary, waiting is not going to make it less scary.
That's all.
I think always document and get as much as you can on written form, because it's very helpful to keep structured expectations and communicate very proactively. I think that's my last advice.
Mark.
For me, learn to set expectations, especially when you plan on starting one. I know it will be very hard because at the beginning you won't be stable, but learn to manage your risk. That's the most important aspect as a freelancer.
Okay. Marlon's next.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to give two pieces of advice. I'm gonna break the rules here. I think the one thing I think is try to have some connection or some type of contract line up. I think it can be either way. It can be that a lot of people who will want to have help in the future, but ideally have at least one contract lined up that you feel comfortable that you're gonna spend time on. And I think that's just gonna make it a lot easier to transition into it, because it is, if you are coming from having a full-time salary, I think even if you did have a full-time job, a job is not necessarily always stable, but I think many people have that feeling that they know that they will get the money the next month to some extent. But I think it's important to have something lined up that just helps with the comfort there. And then another thing is sort of related to rates. I think appreciate your own worth. I think in the beginning you might try to maybe go with a lower rate because you're a bit uncomfortable in the beginning, or you potentially spend a lot of additional time that you might not, if you do bill per hour. I sometimes been spending a lot of additional time in the beginning that I wasn't billing for. So I think it's important to really appreciate your own, what you're worth, and make sure that you're charging for your work, and be comfortable with that. And there's always a negotiation, right? So I think even if there's a back and forth, I think they're not going to say, if you put out a rate and the customer isn't happy with it, they're not going to say, no, I'm never going to talk to you again. They're going to ask for something else, and then you can negotiate that. But I think it's important to value your own time.
Matthias.
Yeah, already lots of great advice. Yeah, don't undersell yourself, as Melon already said. And the one thing I might add is, if a client approaches you and he wants you, or he asks you to be on this project, and you've never done this kind of stuff or this exact kind of project before, maybe it's a little bit new technology, and you're undecided, should I do it, or am I too inexperienced? I would always accept the project and try to do it, because that's how you gain more experience and get better and improve yourself.
That brings us to you, James.
Yeah, as Matthias and as Marlon said, value yourself. Know your value and stick to that, and don't freak out if you're in a lean patch and the work seems to be drying up a little. You'll find yourself feeling like you want to apologize for your rate, or to kind of second guess yourself and say, well, I mean, my normal rate is this, but there could be some. No, look, your rate should always go up, never down. I would rather work fewer hours at a higher rate than more hours at a lower rate, right? So just have confidence. Work will come again, and you'll be glad that you stuck to your value.
I definitely agree. You shouldn't underprice yourself or undervalue yourself. I do think that sometimes it pays to underpromise a little, beyond what you think you could offer. Obviously avoiding scope creep, but maybe slightly over delivering is okay, as long as it's within scope. And in that regard, I think I might have found a way to share these slides that I said I couldn't share. And so obviously you've joined us for this freelancing panel. The next stage is the get together. We really encourage you to stay in Gather Town. When we leave the stream here, the panel members are going to be coming to join you in the Gather Town environment, where we can chat together further. Reminding that 5 attendees today will get a chance to win a 6-month subscription to Orbit, and those attendees have already been selected now by the team, but you'll be informed in Gather Town, so hang around to hear about that. Just want to remind you about some further upcoming events. The WWDC Pictionary game by Swift Philippines, or Swift PH, 6 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. Pacific time on the 11th. The Content Creator Group Together at 7 p.m. on the 11th, and then the Swift UI Group Together at 11 a.m. Pacific time on the 11th as well. So there's a plan to try and do a group shot in the venue. Have your video on, and we'll see you there in just a minute. and we will be joining you too. Thank you so much for dialing in to this. It's been a real pleasure to be able to have this conversation with the people on the panel. Looking forward to expanding that beyond just the Padlet questions to conversations with the rest of you as well, because after all, that's what the most valuable part about DubDub is, isn't it? Is making those connections. And so let's continue to do that. Really appreciate having you all here this evening, this morning.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you in a bit.